Hi guys, and welcome to another week of RIA Sail from Home. This week we're going to be looking at upwind pumping, okay? So something that's going to absolutely accelerate your speed during a race, your ability to start well, loads and loads of benefits to pumping. And for those of you that are just starting out, we're going to cover a little bit of the basics. And then for those of you that have already done a lot of pumping, there's going to be some technical stuff in here as well. We're going to break pumping up into a couple of different modes. So mainly we're looking a little bit at pumping in displacement mode. So when it's light winds, probably sort of 7 knots or less, and the board is in displacement, so it's cutting through the water. And we're also going to look at pumping in when we're railing. There's a couple of differences between the two, and I'll go on to explain them. The best way I'm going to explain them today, I think, is to use some video. We're not going to use the ghost rig this week just because it's not the easiest thing to demonstrate pumping on. So we're going to use some video. What would be great for you guys to do at home after this video is to take some of that video, or go find some video of your own, some best practice, someone you know that's really good at pumping, and try and put that next to your video of yourself if you've got any, and make some comparisons, and just note down where you think you can improve, and a bit of an action plan as to how you're going to make sure when you get back on the water you're absolutely clear in the goals that you need to make your pumping better. The other thing we're going to cover today is we're going to look at a little bit of how you can manage your fitness, make sure you're absolutely as fit as possible to pump as well and for as long as possible during races, particularly in the light breeze. We're going to look at some things you can do on land, so some things you can do now in this time off, some circuit stuff, some fitness that's going to help you, give you a really good base for when you get on the water. And we're also going to look at some fitness sessions that you can do on the water to practice getting fit enough for pumping. Just want to make clear before we do that, there's a big difference between a technique session and a fitness session. So if you're on the water practicing your pumping stuff, you might want to spend some time practicing the technique and not working too hard, just so that you're not out of breath, your form isn't taking some of the hit. And then once you feel like you've started to ingrain that technique, you can then go and push some fitness, okay? So like I said, we're going to look at some videos today, and here is just a video of displacement pumping and pumping on the rail. Okay, here we've got a video of Boris Shaw in displacement mode doing some displacement pumping. So when the board is in displacement mode, as you can see, it's cutting through the water. It's not got enough lift to come up and sit on top of the water. It's cutting through, and those pumps are much more consistent. As you can see, he's making consistent bouncing movement. There's a flicking at the top of the sail, and this kind of pumping you can expect to carry on for almost the whole windward beat, with some very short breaks in between, and it's done in less than 7 knots, or when we're not railing. Now you can see the board is up on the rail. We've got a video of Kieran Martin doing some power pumping. As you can see, the range is a lot bigger, there's a lot more drive with the legs, and the board is now lifted up. It has lift from the dagger board that picks it up on top of the water a little bit more, giving it more speed and a much bigger difference between pumping and not. Some of the basics are very different. As you can see, his foot position is different, the rig movement is much different, and what's most different about this kind of pumping is that you expect to do intervals of around 15 seconds with 40 seconds off at least. Much less time is spent in this mode of pumping, but it has much more effect. Hugely important off the start line, and very important in those pressure points on the course. Okay, so we're going to look first at breaking down displacement pumping. and we're going to look at a number of key things. Before we do that, I'm just going to highlight again exactly when we use this mode. So as you can see, the board is currently cutting through the water, so it's not got enough speed or lift to begin railing and sit on top of the water, or even planing and sit on top of the water with the dagger board up. So the board is in displacement mode. That means it's cutting through the water. So therefore we call this mode of pumping displacement pumping. Now, the aim generally of this kind of pumping is to increase a little bit of lateral drive on the side of the board, which is going to then in turn give you a little bit more lift and hopefully a little bit more speed. And also you'll see that the top end of the sail, which is called the leech, so this part of the sail just here, it does a lot of flicking, a lot of bouncing, and that allows you to create a little bit more power in the sail and hopefully again drive you forwards a little bit. So first thing we're going to talk about is what's going on with the sail position and what's going on with the sail. Then we're going to have a little look at the board and what's going on with that. And then we're going to look at how the body is causing those things to happen. So in particular, we're going to look at the feet position, the relation between our hands and our hips, and the movement that happens in between. And we're going to look at those things for this type of pumping, and we're going to look at exactly the same things for power pumping on the rail as well. So those are kind of the key areas you need to look at when we're pumping, and they are slightly different depending on what type of pumping you're doing. However, they are still the focuses are still the same. So first thing, like I said, we'll look at the sail. So we want to try, as you can see, the rig is pretty much as upright as you can get it in this breeze. So it's very light. It's a very light day in this video. And the lighter it is, the harder it is to get that rig upright. The reason there's probably a little bit of leeward tilt with the rig in this one is because it's so light. Boris is trying to get some of his weight off of the board so that he can get a little bit of drive and power into his pump, and he's using the weight of the sail a little bit to do that, because there's not enough breeze to lean off completely. So that'll be why the rig is leaning over a little bit. As it gets windier, so this is probably about 4 or 5 knots, as it gets windier towards 6, 7 knots, you'd expect the rig to be bang on that middle line, bolt upright. Next thing I want you to look at, and I'll play the video for this next part, are the difference between, so what's moving and what's not. So if we look at the clue should be staying relatively still. And when I say the clue, that's just this part of the sail here. And the leech, you'll see, which is the end of the sail there, should be bouncing in a nice rhythmic motion. So I'll just play the video now. So you can see that clue staying relatively still, and that leech is bouncing nicely consistently. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the board. What you can see already, just in the snapshot we've got here, is that there's a little bit, just ever so slightly, a little bit of leeward tilt on the board. That means the leeward rail is in the water a little bit more, giving him a more lateral resistance, and in turn more lift to be able to point a little bit higher upwind. So that little bit of toe pressure there is just giving him a little bit more drive and lift to be able to point higher upwind. The next thing you'll see as I play the video is you'll probably see a little bit of drive going through the board and into the board, almost sideways a little bit. As you see that happen, you'll see the board just bounce ever so slightly a little bit off of that rail. Now what you've got to be careful of when you're doing this is that you're not pushing too hard, particularly in the lighter stuff. So at this point in time, I've already pointed out it's very light breeze, so probably not moving very fast. Now if you remember back to the first video I did, if we're not moving very fast, we don't have much flow over the side of the board, the rail, the dagger board and the fin. And if we don't have loads of flow over those, then they don't give us as much lateral resistance. And if we don't have as much lateral resistance, then we can risk, if we push too hard, we can risk going sideways. So we've just got to be really careful with the amount we're driving sideways, because if we're doing it too much, then we're going to cause those to stall and spin out and slow ourselves down a little bit, which often happens on a techno because it's got really quite small rails and small dagger board and small fin, and sometimes we have some bigger sailors. Now it doesn't mean that you can't pump as hard, you can't pump as effectively. You just need to be careful with the amount of lateral drive you're putting in and see if you can put some of that work rate into the sail. So as you can see, Boris just putting a small amount of lateral drive into the pump there. You can see that board just moving ever so slightly, not too much. Just got to be a little bit careful here. Just get occasionally a little bit heel heavy, so the more consistent we can keep that trim, the better. But generally pretty good, and you can see very subtle movements in the board, no spinning sideways or drifting sideways happening there, so that's pretty spot on. So and as you can see really clearly there, he's just got an ever so slight amount of toe pressure. Now the last thing we're going to have a look at is the body position that makes the board move, makes the sail pump as we want it to. Now, I've just got this screenshot here. It's a really good example of how we use our body weight to try and put power into the pump. Now, often people make the mistake of thinking that you need to be really big and strong to do some powerful pumps, and actually it is our body weight and where we put it that puts the power into the pump. So if we're really efficient at moving our body weight, then we're going to be pretty efficient at pumping as well. So as I said at the start, we're going to look at hands in relation to hips, and we're also going to look at feet position. Now some people, we'll start with the foot position because there's something a little bit different going on here. So we've got a little bit of staggered foot position. That's generally a little bit of personal preference, and if you have some problems with trim, or trim is your focus, I would start with just keeping both those feet on the center line. Now, moving your feet slightly so that they're staggered can, one, be a little bit more comfortable. It might also square your pump up if you're a little bit twisted already, and if you're struggling to stay sheeted in, and that might help as well. So foot position and changing it will have an effect on the rest of your pump. So it's important to make sure that you know where your feet are and there's a reason that they are where they are. So if trim is your focus, get them bang on the center line and keep that as a starting point and work from there. If there's another problem you need to solve, then you can try moving your feet and see what effect it has and work from there. Okay? The next point I want to make is absolutely imperative across all pumping, and that is the distance between hands and hips. So the distance between hands and hips is where we get our power. If we make that distance really big, which as you can see, Boris here has pretty much made it as big as he can, he's as far away from his hands as he can get, and that's going to really help him put some power into the pump whilst maintaining or whilst not overusing his muscles to tire him out. So he's using his body weight. Once he gets down to that low position, in displacement mode, because we're in a very rhythmic type of pumping, and it's something that we're going to do for a longer period of time, you don't expect that range to be too big. We just want to bounce off that bottom end. So if I press play, you see there's not a huge range going on here. He's just bouncing off the bottom end of that pump, putting a nice amount of power consistently into each mode. It's just me telling Boris to put in a little bit more work. Now, if we go back, what you can notice here is all of the pump is coming from the hips almost, and there's only a small arm bend there just to pull him back up ever so slightly for a reset. Big mistake that a lot of people make is they use their arms a lot, and there's a lot of bending in the arms going on. And as you can see, Boris here, there's very little arm bend going on, just enough to pull him back up to start his pump again, and then the rest of the pump comes from the bend at the hips and the knees. Now we're going to have a look at power pumping. So this type of pumping is done when the board is able to get up on the rail. So you can see by this snapshot here that the board has enough lift that it's lifted so it's on top of the water, and we're able to move. Then, because we have enough lift and enough speed, we have a much more lateral resistance. The lateral resistance is also moved back on the board, which means that our feet are able to come back and into the front foot strap. And this type of pumping is done in generally 7 knots all the way up to maybe around 15 knots. It differs slightly as the wind increases. We probably expect to see a bigger range in the lighter stuff and a shorter range in the windier stuff. And as I said before, from displacement pumping, some of the key components that we're going to look at are the same. So what's going on with the rig, what's going on with the board, where our feet are positioned, and what's going on with our hips and our hands to create the effect that we're trying to do. So first of all, if we just have a look at the sail, something I want you to notice is the difference between the movement of the sail between this type of pumping and displacement pumping. So remember, with displacement pumping, we were very flicky, bouncing that leech up and down. And with this type of pumping, as you will see, there's much more of a flowing movement. Now, there's still that leech movement going on at the top of the sail, but the movement is much more flowing. Now, if we pull it all the way back again to square on, something else that's important to notice with the rig movement. As Kieran starts pumping here, particularly when he first gets going, you'll notice that there's a lot of forwards movement in the rig as the pump comes in. The reason for that is that there's a lot of drive and a lot of power dropping back at the start of the power pump. And what will happen is, if you don't bring the rig forward through the pump, is you'll find that the board starts to steer upwind and you end up stuffing into wind too much and losing all your flow. So in order to keep the flow during power pumping, you'd expect to see the rig coming in and forwards to reset your pump. As it comes forwards, that's where the arm bend brings it forwards, and hopefully that should bring you back up to reset your pump and keep you on a nice consistent angle. As I said, if you don't have that forwards movement, you'll find that you end up stuffing up into wind a lot, stalling and slowing down. Okay, so that's the rig movement. As I said, there's a lot more movement going on. There's a much bigger range, but as it gets windier, you'd probably expect to see a smaller range. Next thing we want to look at is the board. So as I said, there's a lot more lateral resistance. We're now moving a lot faster. Lateral resistance has moved back on the board because of that. So as you can see, Kieran's front foot there is in the front foot strap on the board. And you can see, if you look at the leeward side of the board, there's a lot of drive going into that side of the board. And we'll talk about how that's done in a moment. But the reason why that is because we have a lot more lift and lateral resistance, we're able to drive sideways through the board, creating even more lift. And that lift will pick us up out of the water even more, onto the rail even more, giving us more release, more speed, and more height upwind. You can see a huge difference in speed between sat in the harness and then pumping onto the rail, and that board really starts to lift up out of the water there, you can see, as the more he drives. Now the most important part of power pumping, we go right back. The most important part of power pumping is what's going on with the body. Now, we talked about how using, in the last type of pumping, how using the body is absolutely essential to save the muscles from fatigue so that you can pump for a long duration. Well, now the body is in power pumping, the body is incredibly important in creating power and creating as much power as possible. So we looked at that difference between the hips and the hands in Boris's pump, and if we see right there in Kieran's pump, when we're power pumping, that distance again between the hips and the hands is really, really big. And that distance between the hips and the hands is what allows us to create the power. Now once we've created that distance and we've dropped nice and low for the pump, one mistake that a lot of people make, particularly with power pumping, is that we're trying to pump the sail. Now with power pumping, because we've got a lot more lateral resistance, we're not only able to pump the sail, we're able to pump the board as well, and this is really important, and this is what gives you that huge burst in speed. So as you can see, Kieran's setting himself up really nicely to drive through that line there. He's got his hips really far away from his hands, so his weight is really far outboard. He's got his knees bent, and then if I press play, you'll see a real big lateral drive. So he'll push sideways through the board to create that lift, and in turn give him more speed. See every pump there really driving through the side of the board with the feet and giving him more lift and more speed in turn. So every pump there just driving through with the feet to try and pop that board up and out of the water even more and accelerate the speed even more. Okay guys, last bits I'm just going to cover are how you can go about improving your fitness for that type of pumping, for those types of pumping, and also some things you can do when we're allowed back on the water to practice those types of pumping. Now, as I said at the start of the video, there's a big difference between a fitness session and a technique session, and it's really important that you get both of them done. So if you want to go out and improve your fitness, then you could go out and focus on working hard. If you want to go out and improve your technique, then you need to make those sessions a lot easier so that you can make sure that you've got really good form and really good technique for the whole session. For now, I'm just going to talk about the fitness session. So obviously for the technique sessions, you just want to keep it within a manageable range, working on those key points that I've described in this video. Moving on to the fitness session, which is, like I said, is a hugely important aspect of pumping. We can do a number of things on land and on the water. So, as I described, if we start with displacement pumping, it's a very consistent type of pumping, and you're very likely to do it for 2 to 3 minutes during a race with a rest of maybe 30 seconds to a minute. Now, obviously on the water, the best way to practice that is simply go on the water and practice pumping for anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes, and then give yourself a minute's rest and repeat, making sure you're doing an equal amount on each tack. It's a really good way of practicing your pumping fitness. When it comes to practicing that kind of stuff on land, we just need to find some simple exercises where we can put ourselves in the same kind of zone for the same kind of time period. Now, one really useful tool is circuit training, because we're really able to manage the intervals that we work at. So for example, we can set ourselves a circuit where each exercise lasts around a minute to 2 minutes, and then we give ourselves 30 seconds break and start the next exercise. So this will start to work similar sort of systems. If you feel like you know what muscles that you work when you're pumping in that kind of pumping, then you can make your own exercises. A couple of guiding exercises that would be good to use: squats, so squat thrusts, burpees, planks, things like that. Things that are working at our trunk muscles, so our core muscles, our glutes and our legs are really good muscles to make sure they're nice and strong, and they're used to working in those kind of conditions that are going to prepare as well for pumping. So that's something that you can do now at home, is some circuit training. You can also use any sort of cardiovascular training to train the cardiovascular systems that we use when we're pumping. And if you want to make those intervals specific, then you can just do them at those exact same intervals. So sort of 3 minutes on, a couple of minutes off. Now, power pumping is a little bit different. You expect to see a lot shorter intervals with a lot more intensity during the exercise. So generally not going to be power pumping for any longer than 20 seconds, and it's probably more in the 10 to 15 second range. Now, what's really important about power pumping is that you're putting in absolutely maximum effort for that whole 10 to 20 second period. As you saw Kieran in those videos, when he was driving through the legs, it had a huge impact on the board, lifting it up and out of the water and accelerating his speed. So if you're putting in maximum effort when you're doing that kind of pumping, you're going to accelerate your speed even more, and not going to waste any of that time. If you spend too much time trying to get the board out of the water rather than putting maximum effort in straight away and getting it straight up out of the water, then you're going to spend some of your energy still in that kind of half displacement mode. If we can get our board straight up out of the water by putting in maximum effort straight away, then there's going to be a lot more release, a lot less resistance of the board cutting through the water, and a lot more lift and therefore speed. So we need to put in maximum effort. So again, a good way to practice that is some circuit stuff with some really high intensity exercises, burpees, squat jumps, lunge jumps, things like that are really going to burn our cardiovascular system, burn the lungs, really burn the muscles, and putting them at those interval ranges of around 20 seconds on to 40 seconds off. You probably do a number of rounds of that before you get tired. Give yourselves a bigger rest. So you probably do getting on for 6 sets of 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. And then I would give myself a rest of around 2 minutes and then repeat. I'd repeat that up to maybe 4, maybe 6 times, depending on how you're feeling. Another really good way of attacking that system that we use, that anaerobic system during that time, is things like sprints. So hill sprints are really good for that. Any sprints on a bike, on a rowing machine, anything like that, where we're working at absolutely maximum capacity for 20 seconds, and then we're going to take 40 seconds of rest. Times that by 6, give yourselves a big rest, do another set. And that's the best way to improve what you can do to improve your pumping fitness while you're on land. Now, there is no better substitute than going on the water, but it's not always possible. I know some of you live far away from your lakes. We're all in lockdown at the moment, so we're not able to do that. But if you can get out on the water and do it, once you can, that's the best way to do it. So, but if you're not able to, these are a good option in terms of substituting that. Okay, so that's Upwind pumping done for this week. Thanks for watching, guys.